As architects, we have two responsibilities and two anxieties, or two parts of our process and concerns, I guess. One is the physical. I mean, as architects, we like making things. You know, we like to see how things are. We enjoy the responsibility of creating a space, a wall, a window, a floor, a room, a facade, a roof. You know. And we believe that making this can be invested with qualities which make it more than normal. So we believe that the physical can be strong, you know, the moving of building into architecture. That it's about the care and the consideration of making something in a full scale. So this is the first thing. The second thing is we are operating in society. So we are not painters or poets. We are responsible for constructing buildings that have a role in society. Sometimes that role is more integrated, a school or a railway station. Other times it's a private house or something. But so we are interested in the social purpose of architecture. So we have two anxieties. One is to make something beautiful, like a sort of architecture in a way. And the other is to make it useful, purposeful, meaningful, part of making our world better, not just through aesthetic beauty, but through its significance as part of our built environment. I'm not so convinced that architecture is radical is in the context of the modern movement. Because the modern movement saw architecture as giving shape and idea to society. Because after the 19th century, with, in a way, the idea of a new society, architects were interested in the radical potential of architecture to demonstrate change and to demonstrate the possibilities of this brave new future based on new technologies, new ways of doing, different relationship between how we make things, etc., etc. I think that was a very exciting period for, in a way, questioning everything. Why should a building be built like it was in the 19th century? Why shouldn't we think about another way of building, etc., etc.? We've done this. And I'm not sure that continuing this idea that the architect is somehow a genius innovator, demonstrating in a heroic way that this architecture could be the future. I'm not sure this is correct, because I think we've seen now that there is no one architecture which is going to be the future. There's no one architect which is going to be the future. So we have a different relationship to the past, and we have a different relationship to the future, in my opinion. And therefore, whether the word radical is the correct one, I think it's about the concepts of responsibility and the notion that architecture is something which not only questions things, but actually confirms things. I think architecture is an affirmative thing as well. I think architecture can be more radical, and I think architectural production and the role of architect probably has to change. And I think the next generation is going to have to be a bit more radical about their relationship with society, and to try to become more useful, not just to investment and giving more value to architecture, but giving more purpose to architecture. I think this is probably maybe a new radical dimension that architects can play. Well, I suppose Berlin is a very particular territory, and certainly the Berlin that we landed in 1994, beginning to think about Neues Museum, and where the program of Berlin was to make some sort of sense of complex history. In a way, the history began again. So the post-war history had somehow gone into some hibernation in some sense, and then it was woken up again in 1989 with a reunification of Berlin and of Germany and the taking down of the Berlin Wall. All of a sudden, history is shaken up again, and so you can't work in Berlin without dealing. I mean, you scratch the ground and you find history, and therefore this is a slightly intense and untypical situation. It's an accentuated situation. I think in this exhibition we're dealing slightly with an anxiety about history, especially in the Berlin context, but even in the Royal Academy, the idea of being diagnostic, that architecture is not just about making things new, it's about making things have value, revaluing things, re-signifying things. And I think that the future of our environment is going to have to think more hard about resources and significance of resources. On the other hand, there are aspects in this exhibition which are trying to find a relationship between modernity and experience, and I would say publicness. The two new projects, James Simon and Humex, are both buildings which try to be more than a building. They both try to expand their responsibility, the nucleus of their program, which in the case of the James Simon is ticketing, auditorium, exhibition, cafe, bookshop. That isn't really making the project. The project is about making a place, about making a new place of Berlin, a new square, a new destination. So it's trying to be public. How can a building be more than its program? Not just functional, but purposeful. And I would say the same with Humex. I think Eugenio Lopez was nervous or very considerate of the idea that how can a private collection be placed in a public place and have public significance? How can it not look like the arrogance of a private individual, but how can it look like the generosity of an institution? The idea of expanding architecturally and spatially, territorially, the nucleus. Because if you reduced Humex to the nucleus, the building is half the size. If you took away all the things which are not necessary, you put it in a pan with a heat and boiled it down, it would be 50%. The other 50% are the things which make it to the city, the Plaza. Unnecessary elements which transfer an introverted, let's say selfish building, which has selfish concerns, to show art in a good way, into a building which has generosity and says, you can enter, I'm friendly, I'm part of the city, blah, blah, blah. And the same with the James Simon. But these are the things which create a relationship between the building and the city, and make a gesture in a time when planning of our cities is less and less considered by city planning. This building could not exist somewhere else. I mean, I would never imagine to do that building in Berlin. I mean, it doesn't make sense. And why not? So some of that is physical. Some of it's to do with climate. But there's no way you can do this open lobby concept, the cafe outside. I mean, anywhere than Mexico City, hardly. I mean, this is... So you try... I wouldn't say you try to do a Mexican building, but you tried to do a building which couldn't be anywhere than Mexico. Then you could say, okay, that's about orientation and climate, maybe material. But also, I think you try to think about culture and memory, because I think that architecture carries memory, and people need to read an idea of a building, and therefore I would say that one of the concerns in a situation where you're not exposing the building, but you're somehow creating it, I would say that the concern to make this building belong to the place, not just that place, but in a way to this culture, is something it's nearly impossible to discuss. But I was very happy when people would say, it seems like a Mexican building somehow. I mean, for me, this was a great compliment. We have generally and increasingly become a service industry to money. We only get happily employed when we add value to the client's project. The client is happy to give me some money if he thinks somehow I've added money to the product. So there's a transactional dimension to that. And as the world is more about investment and less about societal innovation, then we become more and more servants of money and less servants of society. So we now give value to money, to investment, whereas of course what we'd like to do is give value to society. This is what we believe. And increasingly that's become difficult. So I think that as the challenges of society are going to become more and more about environment and social, we're going to have to think more and more about how do we keep cities working in an intelligent way, how do we keep the qualities of a city, diversity, housing in the center, affordable housing, people can afford to live. I mean, no one can afford to live in London anymore. It's ridiculous. It's not a city. And as issues of sustainability and environment become more and more problematic, that we have to think differently about resourcing and how we treat our built world, then we're going to have to, if we're going to have any relevance, we're going to have to think about other ways of operating, and maybe operating in less formalistic ways. You know, architecture up until now, you know, my office is in a way a model of like architectural practice. You have 100 people and you do models and you do buildings and they have columns and they go in magazines. And I think in the future, I think there will be a lot of more relevant work done that is not formalistic. It's not about necessarily making buildings. It's about helping environmental and ambiental, protecting our environment, considering our built environment, considering the quality of life, how people live, not just in the monumental architecture, but in schools, in housing, these things. The focus has to shift from this to that. It has to. And at the moment, it's not doing that.